I remember the exact moment I stopped trusting my own legs. It wasn't a fall. It wasn't some dramatic accident. It was a remote control. I dropped it right there on the living room floor. Nothing unusual. I leaned forward to pick it up, same as I've done 1,000 times. And then I just paused. My body didn't follow through. My legs didn't feel stable. My balance felt off. I stayed there half bent, staring at a plastic remote like it had suddenly become a serious problem. I tried again, slower this time. Same result. My legs felt weak, not painful, just unreliable. That's the word, unreliable. So I sat back down. I told myself I'd get it in a minute. Then I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Then I spent the next 10 minutes pretending I didn't care, that I couldn't do something as simple as picking up a remote. Eventually, I called my daughter. Now, let me tell you something. At 94, you expect a few things to slow down. You expect your knees to complain your back, to argue your memory, to play tricks on you now and then. What you don't expect is to start negotiating with your own body over something that small. And what bothered me wasn't the remote, it was what it meant. I sat there after my daughter left, looking around my own living room, and for the first time I had a thought I didn't like at all. Not fear exactly, something quieter than that. I thought, when did this start? Because it didn't feel sudden. It felt like something that had been building for a while, and I just hadn't been paying attention. Looking back, the signs were there. My feet were cold more often, even when the house was warm. By evening, my legs felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something all day, even when I hadn't done much at all. My socks left those deep marks around my ankles, the kind you notice but ignore. And the leg cramps at night, those were getting harder to brush off. But I did brush them off. I told myself it was normal. I told myself it was just age doing what age does. What I didn't realize was that I had already started changing my life around those symptoms without admitting it. I sat more, I moved less, I stopped getting up unless I really had to. It wasn't a decision I made out loud. It just happened quietly, one small choice at a time. And that's how you end up sitting in your own house, staring at something on the floor, wondering why your body isn't doing what it used to do. That afternoon, after everything settled down, I didn't turn the TV back on right away. I just sat there thinking about how many times that day I had actually stood up. Not many. That's when something uncomfortable started to become clear. Not all at once. Just enough to bother me. Because the problem didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. It felt like I had been slowly stepping away from my own life without even noticing it. I stayed in that chair a little longer than I needed to, telling myself I was just resting. That became a pattern, not all at once. Not in a way you notice right away. It starts small. You sit down after breakfast and think, I'll get up in a minute. Then the morning news comes on, then the weather, then something else. Before you know it, you've been sitting there an hour without moving much at all. That used to never happen to me. I was always on my feet, cooking, cleaning, stepping outside to check the garden, walking down the driveway to grab the mail. Nothing impressive, just normal life. But somewhere along the way, those small movements started to feel optional. And when something feels optional, you start skipping it. I told myself I was being practical. Why walk all the way to the mailbox when I could grab it later? Why stand in the kitchen when I could sit and eat in the living room? Why go out to the yard when it was easier to just look at it through the window? Each decision made sense on its own. That's the problem. By the afternoon, my legs would feel heavy, not sore, not injured, just tired in a way that didn't match what I had actually done that day. I hadn't done much at all. That didn't add up, but I didn't question it. In the evenings, I'd notice the swelling more. My socks would leave those deep lines around my ankles. I'd press my finger into my skin and watch it take a second too long to bounce back. Again, I noticed it. I just didn't do anything about it. And the cold. That one bothered me more than I admitted. Sitting in a warm room wrapped in a sweater and still feeling like my feet were cold from the inside out. I'd tuck them under a blanket and tell myself it was just poor circulation, like it was a harmless little phrase instead of a warning sign. Then there were the nights. I'd be asleep comfortable and suddenly one of my legs would tighten up so fast it felt like something had grabbed it from the inside. A sharp cramp in my calf that would wake me up completely. I'd sit there in the dark waiting for it to pass, rubbing my leg, trying not to make too much of it. The next morning I'd forget about it, or pretend to. Looking back now, it wasn't that I didn't see what was happening. It's that I didn't connect the pieces. Each symptom felt separate. Cold feet, swelling cramps, heaviness. None of them felt serious on their own, but together they were telling a very clear story. I just wasn't listening. And while all of that was going on, something else was changing that had nothing to do with my legs. I stopped going outside as much. The garden out back used to be part of my routine. Not a big project, just something I checked on every day. A few steps outside, a few minutes standing, moving, paying attention to something other than myself. That slowly turned into maybe later, and then into nothing at all. The mailbox was the same. It's not far, just down the driveway, but I started looking at it like it was farther than it really was. I'd wait until I had a reason to go out, and when that reason didn't come, the mail just stayed there. Some days I realized I hadn't stepped outside at all. That would have sounded ridiculous to me 10 years ago, but there I was, sitting in the same chair in the same spot, moving less and less, telling myself everything was fine, because nothing had completely failed yet. And that's how it happens, not with a big moment, not with a clear line you can point to. Just a series of small choices that slowly change what your day looks like, until one day your body starts acting different, and you can't quite say when it began. I started noticing how quiet my days had become, not in a peaceful way, but in a way that felt smaller. I used to have little reasons to get up, nothing big, just normal things. Step outside and check the weather. Walk to the mailbox. Stand in the kitchen long enough to cook something decent. None of that felt like effort back then. It was just how the day moved. Somewhere along the line, that movement stopped being automatic. I began organizing my day around sitting, not because I made a decision to. It just felt easier. I'd bring things closer to me instead of going to them. I'd keep the remote within reach. I'd leave dishes for later. I'd look at the shoes by the door and think, I'll go out tomorrow. Tomorrow became a habit. I remember one morning, standing by the front window, looking at the mailbox at the end of the driveway. It wasn't far. I could see it clearly. I even knew there was probably something in there. But I stood there a little longer than usual thinking about the walk, not the distance, the standing, the balance, the feeling in my legs. Then I turned away. That's the kind of moment that doesn't seem important while it's happening. Nobody's watching. Nothing dramatic happens. You just choose not to do something. But those choices add up. Church used to be part of my week. Not every single Sunday, but often enough that it gave my week a rhythm. Getting dressed, getting out of the house, sitting, standing, talking to people afterward. At some point, I started skipping it. First, because I didn't feel like dealing with the effort. Then because I got used to not going. The phone rang less, too. Not because people stopped calling, but because I stopped answering sometimes. I'd look at the phone, think I'll call them back later, and then not do it. Conversations take energy, and when your body feels off, even talking can feel like more than you want to deal with. Meals changed. I used to cook, nothing fancy, just regular meals. But standing in the kitchen started to feel like something I had to manage. So I simplified. Then I cut corners. Then I started relying on whatever was easiest. Something from the freezer, something quick. Something I could eat, sitting down, without thinking about it. One day I realized I had eaten dinner in the same chair 3 nights in a row, watching the same evening news, barely moving except to reach for the remote or a glass of water. That's when it hit me, not all at once, just enough to make me uncomfortable. I couldn't remember the last time I had a reason to stand up that actually mattered, and that thought stayed with me longer than I expected, because it wasn't just about my legs anymore. It was about how little my day was asking from me, and how little I was giving back. The strange part is nothing had completely failed yet. I could still walk. I could still stand. I could still move around the house if I needed to. But I wasn't using that ability the way I used to. I had started choosing stillness over movement, over and over again, until it became normal. And when something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. Even when your body starts to feel different. Even when your world starts to feel smaller. Even when a simple walk to the mailbox starts to feel like something you might just skip altogether. I picked up the phone a little slower than usual when my daughter called later that week. She asked how I was doing. Same question she always asks, and I gave her the same answer I always give. I'm fine. There's a certain way you say that when you don't want a conversation to go any deeper. Most people recognize it. My daughter did too. She paused for a second, then asked, "You sure?" That's when I almost told her about the remote. Almost. Instead, I changed the subject. Asked about her kids, asked about work, kept the conversation moving away from me. It worked. It usually does. But after I hung up, I sat there holding the phone a little longer than I needed to, because the truth was I wasn't fine. Not in any dramatic way, nothing urgent, nothing that would send me to a hospital. But something had clearly shifted, and I was the only one who knew it. And I was the only one pretending it wasn't happening. A couple days later, I found myself standing in the kitchen looking at the sink full of dishes. Nothing unusual, just a normal mess from a couple of meals. I turned on the water, rolled up my sleeves, and started washing. About halfway through, my legs started to feel tired. Again, not pain. Just that same heavy, unsteady feeling. The kind that makes you think about sitting down even when you don't want to. So I stopped. I dried my hands, turned off the water, and sat down before I finished. That's when it hit me in a way that was harder to ignore than the remote. I didn't stop because I was busy. I didn't stop because I didn't care. I stopped because I didn't feel steady enough to keep standing, and that was new. I sat there looking at the dishes still in the sink, and for the first time I didn't try to explain it away. I didn't tell myself it was just a long day or that I needed more rest. I knew exactly what it was. Something was changing in my body, and I had let it happen quietly. Later that afternoon, I walked past the front door and glanced at the mailbox again. Same as before, same distance, same driveway. This time, I didn't even consider going out there. That bothered me more than I expected, because a few months ago, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. I would have grabbed my keys, stepped outside, and been back in a couple of minutes. Now I was calculating it in my head like it was something I needed to prepare for. That's when the thought finally settled in clearly. I wasn't afraid of falling. I was afraid of needing help for everything. And once that thought shows up, it doesn't leave easily. It follows you into small decisions, into moments that used to feel automatic. It makes you hesitate when you reach for something, when you stand up, when you think about walking a little farther than usual. That evening, I didn't turn the TV on right away. I just sat there looking around the room, noticing how much of my day had been spent sitting in that exact same spot. And for the first time, I didn't like what I saw. Not because something terrible had happened, but because I could see where it was heading if I didn't do something about it. I found myself sitting in that exam room a week later, staring at the paper on the table, listening to the usual sounds from the hallway. Same routine, blood pressure, questions, a quick look at my legs. The doctor was kind, professional, the kind of person who's seen a lot and doesn't overreact to anything. He asked about the cramps, the swelling, the cold feeling in my feet. I answered honestly this time. No, I'm fine. He nodded a few times, checked a couple things, and sat back and said, "At your age, circulation can slow down a bit. It's pretty common." That word again, common. Then came the advice. Try to stay a little more active. Move your legs more during the day. Avoid sitting too long. That was it. No new medication, no detailed plan, no sense of urgency. Just move more. I didn't argue. What was I going to say? He wasn't wrong. I already knew I had been moving less. I just hadn't done anything about it. But sitting there, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. Nobody was coming in with a solution. There wasn't going to be a moment where someone handed me a fix that made everything easier. If anything was going to change, it was going to be something I had to build myself, one small decision at a time. On the way home, I stopped by Kroger. Not for anything special, just a few things I needed. I noticed how I moved through the store, slower, more careful. I found myself looking for the nearest place to sit, even though I hadn't been in there long. That bothered me. I didn't like thinking of a grocery store as something I had to get through instead of something I just did. A couple days later, I got a call about a local community program. They offered in-home visits from a physical therapist for older adults. I almost said no. It sounded like something meant for people worse off than me. But I paused. That hesitation again. The same kind I had been having with everything else. So I said yes. A few days later, Rachel Miller showed up at my door. Mid-40s, calm, straightforward, no nonsense. She asked me to walk across the room, just a few steps, then sit, then stand again. She didn't say much at first, just watched. Then she said something simple. You're not using your legs the way they're meant to be used anymore. Not weak, not broken, not used. That landed differently than anything I had heard so far. She didn't talk about long workouts or complicated routines. No equipment, no gym. She pulled out a chair and said, "Sit down." I remember thinking, that's it. She showed me a small movement, then another, then one more, all of them simple, almost too simple. And I'll be honest with you, my first thought was, there's no way this is going to make a difference. After everything I had been feeling after the changes I had noticed in my body, these little movements didn't seem like enough to matter. I probably wouldn't have stuck with it if I hadn't been so tired of how things were going. So I tried it, not because I believed in it, but because I didn't have anything better. I sat down in that same chair later that afternoon and tried the first movement the way Rachel showed me. Lift one knee, set it down, then the other. That was it. No resistance bands, no weights, no timer counting down anything intense. Just lifting my legs while sitting in a chair, like I'd done 1,000 times before without thinking about it. Except this time I paid attention. By the third or fourth lift, I could feel something in my thighs working harder than I expected. Not pain, just effort. The kind you notice when you haven't used a muscle properly in a while. It felt almost ridiculous. I remember looking down at my legs and thinking, this is what's supposed to fix anything. But I kept going. Then she had shown me the second one. Straighten the leg out in front, point the toes, then pull them back. Slow, controlled. That one surprised me more. Not because it was hard, but because I realized how stiff my legs had become. The movement was simple, but it didn't feel easy. My calf tightened in a way that told me it hadn't been doing much lately. The last one was the strangest. Both feet flat on the floor. Lift the heels. Lower them. Again and again. She called it a calf pump. Said it helps push blood back up through the legs. I did it for about a minute and stopped. Not because I was exhausted, but because I wasn't convinced it was doing anything. That was day one. The next day I almost didn't do it at all. I sat in the chair, looked at my legs, and thought about skipping it. Nothing was forcing me. No one was watching. And it didn't feel important enough to matter if I missed a day. So I skipped it. The day after that, I remembered again. Did a few half-hearted repetitions, then stopped. It felt like something I could easily talk myself out of. And for a few days, I did. That's the part nobody talks about. Not the beginning when everything feels new, and not the result when something finally changes. It's that middle space where nothing feels different yet, and you start wondering why you're even bothering. I had that thought more than once. I'm 94. What exactly am I expecting here? But every time I considered dropping it completely, I remembered the feeling of sitting there unable to pick up that remote. That feeling was worse than the effort. So I kept coming back to it, not perfectly, not every day at the same time, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes just a minute or two before I stood up. There was no big moment where it suddenly felt like it was working. It didn't feel like progress. It just felt like doing something I hadn't been doing before. And for a while, that was all it was. I noticed it in the middle of the night when I didn't wake up. That might sound strange, but for weeks I had been waking up from those sharp calf cramps like clockwork. You get used to it. You expect it. You brace for it before you even fall asleep. And then one night, nothing. I woke up in the morning and realized I had slept straight through. No cramp. No sitting up in the dark rubbing my leg waiting for it to pass. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just noticed. A few days later, it happened again. That's when I started paying attention a little more closely. During the day, my legs still felt heavy sometimes, but not as quickly. I could stand in the kitchen a bit longer before that tired feeling showed up. Not all day, not like when I was younger, but longer than before. I found myself finishing things I used to stop halfway through, washing the dishes without sitting down, standing at the counter long enough to make a simple meal. Small things, but they added up. After about a month, something else changed. The cold feeling in my feet started to ease up. Not completely gone, but different, less constant, less noticeable. That surprised me more than anything, because I hadn't been doing anything dramatic, no new medication, no big routine, just those same small movements repeated when I remembered. By the second month, I realized I was moving around the house more without thinking about it. I wasn't planning it. I wasn't telling myself, go walk now. I was just getting up more often, walking from one room to another without that same hesitation. One morning, I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. I stood there for a minute, looking out at the driveway the same way I had before from inside the house. This time I didn't turn back. I walked, slowly, carefully, but steadily. Each step felt deliberate, like I was paying attention to something I had ignored for a long time. My legs weren't perfect. They weren't strong in the way they used to be, but they were responding. That's the word that kept coming to mind. Responding. A few days later, I walked all the way to the mailbox. No stopping halfway, no turning around. Just a slow, steady walk there and back. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't call anyone. But I noticed how different it felt compared to just a few weeks earlier. When I went back for my next checkup, I didn't expect much to be different. Same routine, same questions. But this time, when the doctor looked things over, he paused for a moment longer than usual. He said, "Your circulation looks better than I expected at your age, especially without medication." That caught my attention, because I hadn't done anything complicated. No special program, no big change, just those 3 movements here and there whenever I thought about it. I nodded, said thank you, and left. On the way home, I kept thinking about what he said, not because I was trying to figure out how it worked, but because it made something very simple feel more real. My legs hadn't suddenly improved overnight. I hadn't fixed anything all at once. I had just started using them again in a way that I hadn't been before. And somewhere along the way, my body responded to that. I started paying attention to my body in a way I never had to before. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. For most of my life, my body just did what it was supposed to do. I didn't think about it much. You get up, you move, you go about your day. If something hurts you, rest. If you feel tired, you slow down. Simple. But after 90, that approach stopped working the same way. What I learned is this: Your body doesn't just weaken because of age. It responds to what you do with it, or what you stop doing with it. That was the part I missed for a long time. I thought I was slowing down because I was getting older, and that's partly true. But what I didn't realize is that I was also speeding up the process by moving less every day. Not in a dramatic way, just in small, quiet ways. Sitting a little longer, standing a little less, skipping things that didn't feel necessary. And the body notices that. It doesn't argue with you. It doesn't warn you loudly. It just adapts. If you stop using certain movements, it starts letting them go. That's what I felt in my legs. They didn't suddenly become weak. They became unused. There's a difference. Once I understood that something changed in how I approached all of this, I stopped thinking in terms of fixing my body. At my age, that's not realistic. You don't fix things the way you might at 40 or 50. What you can do is give your body a reason to keep working. And that doesn't require anything complicated. It requires repetition, not intensity, not perfection, just repetition. Those small exercises I started doing didn't feel important at first. They didn't feel like they were doing much at all. But what they did was remind my body of movements it had started to forget. Lift, extend, flex, press. Simple actions, but done regularly, they send a signal. We're still using this. That's what your body responds to. I also learned that waiting to feel better before you move is the wrong order. I used to think, I'll do more when I feel stronger. But that's not how it works anymore. You move first. Then the strength follows. It might be slow. It might not be obvious at first, but it builds. Another thing I had to accept is that consistency matters more than effort. There were days I didn't feel like doing anything, days when my legs felt off, or I was just tired, or I simply didn't want to bother. On those days, doing something small mattered more than doing nothing. A few repetitions, a minute or two, that's enough to keep the pattern going. Because once you stop completely, it's harder to start again. And at this age, starting again is the hardest part. So I stopped thinking in big terms. I didn't ask, how do I get stronger? I asked, did I move today? That question changed everything, because the answer to that question determines what happens next, even if you don't notice it right away. I stopped waiting for the right moment to start doing things again. That was the first real change. For a long time, I told myself I needed to feel better before I moved more. I thought if my legs felt stronger, then I'd stand longer, walk more, get back into a routine. But I had it backwards. Nothing changed until I started moving first. Not in a big way. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to overhaul my life. I didn't make a schedule or set goals or write anything down. I just stopped making everything optional. If I stood up, I stayed standing a little longer. If I walked to the kitchen, I didn't rush back to sit down. If something needed to be done, I did it right then, instead of telling myself later. Later had become a habit. So I replaced it with now, even when now wasn't convenient. One of the simplest changes I made was this. I stopped sitting for long stretches without interruption. I didn't use a timer. I didn't count minutes. I just paid attention. If I realized I'd been sitting too long, I stood up, even if it was just for a minute. That alone made a difference. I also changed how I handled everyday tasks. Instead of trying to get everything done quickly so I could sit down again, I slowed things down and let them take time. Washing dishes became standing practice. Cooking became movement. Even walking from one room to another wasn't something I rushed through anymore. I used it. That's the word that fits best. I used my daily life as a way to keep moving. I didn't add more to my day. I just stopped removing movement from it. The mailbox became part of that. At first, it was something I had to think about, something I prepared for. But over time, it became routine again. Not easy, but normal. And that matters more than people realize. When something feels normal, you don't avoid it. I also made a small change with how I handled meals. Instead of eating everything sitting in one spot, I gave myself reasons to stand. Getting up for water, moving around while things heated up, not rushing back to the chair the second I had the chance. These aren't big changes, that's the point. Big changes don't last very long at this age. They feel like effort. They feel like something you have to keep up with. Small changes blend into your day. They don't require motivation. They just become part of how you live. I didn't think of it as a plan. I thought of it as removing the habits that were making things worse. Sitting too long, avoiding small tasks, waiting for the right time. Once those started to fade, everything else began to shift with it. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, and that steady change is what holds. I found myself standing at the sink one evening finishing the dishes without thinking about sitting down. That used to be the moment I gave up halfway. Now it was just something I did, and that's when it became clear to me. None of this was really about the exercises, not in the way I thought at the beginning. Those 3 movements helped, yes. They gave my legs something to respond to again. They got things moving where nothing had been moving for a while. But they weren't the real reason things changed. The real change came from something much simpler. I stopped stepping away from my own life. That's what had been happening without me noticing. Not all at once, just a little at a time, sitting more, doing less, avoiding things that used to be automatic. And the body follows that. That's something I understand now in a way I didn't before. Your body doesn't lead your life at this age. It follows it. If your days get smaller, your body will shrink to match. If you stop giving it reasons to move, it will stop offering you the ability to do it comfortably. It's not punishment. It's just how it works. And the opposite is true too. When you start using your body again, even in small ways, it pays attention. It adjusts. It comes back as much as it can. Not perfectly, not like it used to be, but enough to stand, enough to walk, enough to take care of yourself without feeling like everything is slipping away. That's what matters. Not being strong, not being fast, not trying to get back to some version of yourself from years ago. Just being able to live your day without constantly negotiating with your body. If there's one thing I would say to anyone watching this, it's this. Don't wait until something stops working completely, because by then everything feels harder. Move while you still can, even when it feels unnecessary, especially when it feels unnecessary. Stand up more than you think you need to. Walk a little farther than feels comfortable. Use the time you already have in your day instead of waiting for a perfect plan. You don't need to overthink it. You don't need to do everything right. You just need to stop doing the things that slowly take it away from you. And maybe more important than that, don't let your life get too small. Call someone. Step outside. Do something that gives your day a reason to exist beyond sitting and waiting. Because once your life starts shrinking, your body follows faster than you expect. I didn't fix my legs. I just stopped giving up on them. And once I did that, they met me halfway.